It's an iconic photograph, gentle enough to entice a smile, potent enough to win a Pulitzer. The photo shows a little boy in a wheelchair being pushed around by Mom. His arms are upraised, fingers held in a Nixonian V for victory salute. His eyes are closed and a luxuriously happy smile is painted across his face. The mom seems calm, almost beatific, hovering over him like an angel. If you get into a staring contest with this photo, then read its caption, you'll understand why it won an award. And then, if you're a parent, the smile will leave your face. You'll quickly avert your gaze, your eyes filling with tears. What you are actually beholding is every parent's worst nightmare. The little boy is dying of cancer. He's happy. He's also bald, thin. His mom is racing around the floors of a hospital in a distracting joyride prior to some treatment. The photographer was Renee Beyer. Her series, A Mother's Journey, which chronicles the death of this boy, won the 2007 Pulitzer Prize for feature photography. Photos like these act like sucker punches to the gut. They create emotional reactions in us that can last a lifetime. I can hardly look at that photo series without choking up. Now, why does that occur? Exactly what does it mean to have an emotional reaction? We're going to explore what emotions are in this lecture. It's my opening subject for a brand new unit I'm calling The Feeling Brain. We've spent so much time talking about our heads, I thought I'd switch gears and talk about our hearts. This opening pivot is divided into 4 parts. Part 1 discusses getting to a definition of emotions. Part 2 discusses brains, bodies, and 2 theories explaining how emotions relate to the interactions of both. Part 3 gets into the neurobiology, focusing on the brain. Part 4 gets into the physiology, focusing on the body. The practical application addresses the role emotions play in mental health. We revisit a tool we first mentioned way back in lecture number 4, cognitive behavioral therapy. Along the way, we'll discuss 2 more famous photographs, one of which also won a Pulitzer, the other of which might have, except it turned out to be a publicity stunt. It should be a fairly easy task to define what an emotion is. You felt dozens of them all day, from minor irritations to experiences that made you smile. Anecdotally, we are very familiar with emotions, but only anecdotally. As we've seen, it's an untrustworthy rope that ties the anecdotal to the neurological. You need go no further than the English language to show how tough anecdotal experiences are to characterize. Here's a test for you. Take the basic word emotions and try to separate it from the word feelings. Do they have connective tissues between them? Or are they the same thing? Are both of these different from the word motivation? How about the word drive? Appraisal? Are the emotions of love different from the emotions of, say, hunger? How are these related to survival drives? Context certainly matters. I have 2 sons, and losing either of them would be my worst nightmare. But I had only a mild reaction to the Pulitzer photo until I read the description. Obviously, some form of memory-based cognitive evaluation was occurring prior to my reaction. I was evaluating what I saw, comparing it to my own experiences. I was appraising it before I felt it. There have been many attempts to settle these definitional issues, and notice how I said that. We haven't settled these issues at all, even the basics. For example, a number of my colleagues do not believe in the concept of emotions at all, except at the obscure, anecdotal 40,000-foot view level. To them, what we call emotions are simply patterns of electrical stimulations involving specific neural networks recruited for some survival purpose. Different patterns accomplish different things, but they're just patterns of activity. To them, distinctions between our feeling worlds and our thinking worlds are artificial. I admit to having some sympathy for this point of view, but only some sympathy. Let's define a few words, starting with the three I will use most in this lecture: emotions, feelings, and that whole appraisal thing. As a starting point, let me revisit that joke from Garrison Keillor in his show A Prairie Home Companion, the one about the mama bear chasing the pastor and the bear thanking the Lord for the meal she was about to receive. Obviously, the pastor felt all kinds of emotions during that episode, and I will use his responses to provide definitions for three words. These definitions come mostly from the writings of Antonio Damasio and Joseph Ledoux, with a little help from Garrison. First up, emotions of which fear was the primary experience. Emotions are automatic, largely unconscious behavioral and cognitive responses triggered when the brain detects a positively or negatively charged significant stimulus. A positive stimulus might be realizing you're falling in love. A negative stimulus might be realizing you're falling off a cliff. Some people would argue they are the same thing. Next up, feelings. Feelings are the conscious perceptions of emotional responses, say Damasio and Ledoux. You become aware of various emotional responses your body and brain are cooking up in reaction to some stimulus. That awareness plus emotions equals feelings. In our story, the pastor's brain reacts to the presence of the bear in a negative fashion. He recruits cognitive and bodily responses that remain mostly out of awareness. That's the emotion of fear. Then the brain makes the pastor aware if those responses are actually occurring. That's the feeling of fear. This is not the entirety of the data. It may not be the most accurate one. You should know the relationship between brain and body and the experience of emotions is fraught with controversy, a topic we're about to explore. Before we do, I want to put in a plug for one more term. This is the concept of evaluation or appraisal in emotional processing. When the pastor looked at the bear, he made an evaluation that a negative stimulus, a threat, was being encountered. That's appraising a visual stimulus. Appraisal is formally defined as an evaluation of the emotional characteristics of a given input. In our example, it became a triggering event for fear due to the judgment of, "I'm seeing something threatening over there." From that appraisal came the emotion, then the feeling. What we have here is a chain: appraisal, emotion, feeling. Got all that? Including the fact that not everybody agrees with that chain? If so, we're ready to get into the disagreement, which is part 2 of our discussion. Here's my second photograph I'd like to describe. It first appeared in the New York Herald Tribune in 1932. Didn't win a Pulitzer. In fact, the picture was snapped as a publicity stunt. It's still fun to look at and frightening to look at. It's a black and white beauty of 11 construction workers taking a break from their labors. They were constructing this skyscraper in New York. They were casually sitting on a slender steel girder 69 floors above Manhattan. No safety harness, no net, nothing but their butts on a slim girder, reading papers or smoking cigarettes or just chatting. Though the photo was apparently staged, the danger was real. One gust of wind, one misplaced pat on the back, and they would be gone. Another photo shows them laying down, feigning sleep, one worker's leg dangling dangerously over the side. Now, I'm not afraid of heights, but these photos give me the shivers every time I see them. So, what does it mean to give someone the shivers? I saw the photo and immediately experienced a bodily reaction, which means a relationship exists between my brain and my body, same as everybody else. Many attempts have been made to explain this relationship with great disagreement, naturally, controversies raging since before that construction picture was taken. One theory seeking to explain the relationship between brain, body, and emotion is called the James-Lange theory of emotions. The James of this duo is a reference to the famous William James of the 19th century. James-Lange theory says an emotionally competent stimulus is detected first, and that triggers physiological responses. Those responses then feed back into the brain, producing the emotions and feelings we experience. A cornerstone idea of James-Lange is that different stimuli elicit different bodily states. Specific emotions are experienced from interpretations of these various states. What we feel depends on what our bodies are telling us. I might shiver at the construction picture coming in large part from one set of bodily responses. But if I saw a flower, a different set of responses would be elicited, and these might cause me to smile. A different emotion. Not so fast, said another duo of researchers in the early part of the 20th century. They put forth what became known as the cannon-barred theory of emotion. They argue emotions couldn't be just a reaction to what's going on in the body, and for two reasons. First, our physiological responses are just too slow. You can consciously feel some things instantly, then your body catches up. Blushing is a really good example. The second comes from data a little more startling. Research eventually showed that arousals were remarkably similar from one stimulus to the next, even opposing stimuli. For example, feelings of pleasure ignite similar physiological responses as feelings of stress do, whether you were looking at Manhattan or magnolias. Given these contradictions, Cannon-Bard came up with another idea. They stated that an emotionally competent stimulus triggers some physiological bodily response while simultaneously triggering other activity in the brain. Different feelings then arise because of differing interpretations of similar aroused bodily responses. Your brain has to make an inference from other sources before the emotion is identified. Yeah? In the Pulitzer Prize-winning cancer patient, my tears did not well up until I knew the little guy was dying of cancer. These days, the controversy has come to something of a truce, mostly because we have more data. Both theories have elements that were shown to be correct over the years, and both have elements that weren't. This is all understandable. The real view turns out to be confusing. We now know that brain and body are both the cause and effect of emotions and feelings. They work together to create the experiences, establishing an equilibrium, a bidirectionality. That obviously requires some explanation. That we'll do in part 3 of this lecture labeled The Brain, a More Modern Understanding. I begin by describing my third photograph, this one yielding a Pulitzer II, taken in the racially charged South of 1951. It involves a football game. The Drake Bulldogs were playing Oklahoma A&M. The star quarterback for the Bulldogs was an African-American man impossibly named Johnny Bright. He was as talented a player as his name suggests, considered Heisman material. He should have had a stellar game against the Aggies. One player made sure that did not happen. Aggie defensive tackle Will Banks Smith started hitting Bright soon after kickoff. Not with his body using legal football violence. Smith used his fists and elbows in what were in fact criminal assaults. Smith knocked Bright unconscious 3 times in the first quarter, eventually breaking Bright's jaw. Don Ultang and John Robinson, working for the Des Moines Register, snapped a series of 6 photos catching Smith in the act of assaulting Bright. One picture actually caught the jaw-breaking hit, Banks pile-driving into Bright's face with his arm, burying his fist under Bright's helmet. The photographers won the Pulitzer for the photos entitled The Johnny Bright Incident. Smith was never punished. I have to admit, that photo makes my blood boil every time I see it. It also makes me cringe, even feel a bit afraid, mostly for Bright. I am reacting to what is called an emotionally competent stimulus, or ECS. Now, suppose you're gazing at this prize-winning photograph and you react the same way I did. You suddenly feel your brain and body undergoing changes and out come feelings, anger, stress, fear. We will discuss what happens to specific regions in the brain now. The first region we will examine is the amygdala. The second is the hypothalamus. Amygdala. Before you became angry and fearful, you had to determine if there was something to be angry and fearful about. This is the familiar evaluation or appraisal step, mediated in part by higher regions of the brain and in part by the amygdala. Let me tell you what the amygdala looks like, then I will tell you what it does. Amygdala literally means almond because, well, that's what it resembles. It's part of a larger complex that goes by the name limbic system. As you may recall from lecture number 3, I ghoulishly likened the limbic system to a small scorpion stuck in the middle of your head. The claws of this scorpion are the amygdalae. You've got 2 amygdalae embedded into your brain, one on the left, one on the right. Okay, now to function. The amygdala is the region most responsible for tagging a given sensory input with an emotional post-it note. The amygdala helps generate emotional experiences and also helps in remembering them. It does this mostly unconsciously, out of sight of our awareness. Those talented claws take input from all 5 senses and return to the brain the beginnings of what may be a memorable emotional reaction. Okay, let's put structure and function together with that Pulitzer. When you see the jaw-breaking photo and you experience anger and maybe fear, signals are sent deep into your brain's interior, arriving at the thalamus. You might remember the thalamus, that egg-shaped structure in the middle of your brain. It sits on the back of that scorpion. The signal is sent down 2 neural paths simultaneously once the thalamus is finished with it. One path goes directly to the amygdala via a highway Joseph Ledoux, the guy who discovered it, calls the fast path. That may be the emotion, and like I said, mostly lies out of your awareness. But not for long. The second signal is shuttled to the cortical regions necessary for you to consciously process your anger and fear. After visiting the cortex, those signals are routed back to the amygdala. That may be the feeling part, but because it has to visit much more brain regions, it's a much slower signal. Not surprisingly, Ledoux calls it the slow pathway. Since the fast pathway is faster than the slow pathway, duh, you may begin responding emotionally to the photo before you're consciously aware of even looking at it. But the emotion will be there when you do, thanks in large part to your amygdala. This doubly stimulated almond is not alone in processing emotional responses. As the amygdala understands the meaning of the photograph, it starts alerting some of its neurological neighbors. One neighbor that gets a lot of attention is the hypothalamus, and I discuss it next. Suppose I told you there was an area in your brain, if properly stimulated by a surgeon, would cause you to propose marriage to that surgeon. There is such a region, and that proposal actually happened to a neurosurgeon in the early 1970s. He was stimulating the hypothalamus during surgery, and the patient, who was fully awake, literally asked for his hand in marriage. Welcome to the wacky world of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus means under the thalamus. It's appropriately named because it lies, well, under the thalamus. It's small and it's thin, only about 1/10 of an inch thick. Don't let its small size fool you. The hypothalamus is also involved in handling the big emotions processed by the rest of the brain, from feelings of stress to feelings of hunger. You can artificially stimulate it and derive feelings of pleasure, hence the marriage proposal. You may even feel like projecting your genes into the next generation. The hypothalamus is not just for romantic and sexual pleasure, though. If you get into a fighting mood as you view that photograph, you can blame that on the hypothalamus too. It also controls body temperature. So if your blood begins to boil, you'll know why. One famous way to remember its functions is to say that the hypothalamus is involved in the 4 F's: fighting, fleeing, feeding, and, well, sexual reproduction. Together, we have several major players working together to give us our emotions and feelings: the amygdala, the cortex, the hypothalamus. What happens if these major players get damaged? Here's a strange response. You might end up having sex with a road. Not in a road, as Paul McCartney might encourage, with the road, and I am not kidding. To see what I mean, you need to look no further than the weird syndrome known as Kluver-Bucy syndrome. Kluver-Bucy syndrome is named after its discoverers, Heinrich Kluver and Paul Bucy. The finding was quite by accident. They did surgery on a monkey named Aurora, and when she came out of anesthetic, they noticed really weird behavioral changes. Aurora started to display a voracious appetite and would put almost anything into her mouth. And I do mean anything, even razor blades and lit cigarettes, if you let her. She also was sexually indiscriminate. She lost her exclusive taste for male monkeys and instead began copulating with just about anyone or anything that would let her, from cats to humans. She exhibited all these weird behaviors without the slightest bit of fear. When the researchers went back to examine her brain, they found the reason why. They had accidentally damaged Aurora's amygdala. There is a frontal lobe human equivalent of Kluver-Bucy, by the way, and they show similar symptoms, sometimes in a humorous fashion. One guy with Kluver-Bucy was arrested for trying to have sex with a road. See? I wasn't kidding. Many other regions of the brain are involved as you generate emotional responses. Some of these regions, like the hypothalamus, alert the rest of the body that some kind of important deliberations are occurring and it better pay attention. And here's the important part regarding the controversies surrounding brain and body. Many of those bodily processes create chemicals and electric signals that go back to the brain, forming feedback loops. These loops inform the brain about the body's reactions, which in turn modifies the brain's experience of emotions and feelings, and even the behaviors that flow from them. That's why brain and body are both cause and effect of emotion. Settling the controversy. At least providing nuance to it. We obviously need to discuss what's going on in the body. The brain stimulates the autonomic nervous system into action. What's the autonomic nervous system? Well, as you may recall from lecture number 1, we talked about the peripheral nervous system. It has 2 components. One is the somatic nervous system, which is involved in voluntary muscle activation. The other is the autonomic system. What the autonomic system does is hinted at in the word it sounds a lot like, automatic. The autonomic nervous system controls bodily processes that are mostly out of our voluntary control, things like blood pressure, breathing, digestion, and so on. When you see an ECS, now remember that stands for emotionally competent stimulus, your brain sends out signals that stimulate this arm of the nervous system. Such stimulation does lots of things, including providing your body with extra energy as you gear up to respond to what you see. It also makes you want to pee. The next system involves hormonal responses. You are already familiar with these responses, whether you're looking at arousing bathing suits at a beach or arousing appetizers at a restaurant. This is the endocrine system. When you see an emotionally competent stimulus, your brain sends out signals that stimulate the endocrine system, dumping hormones into your bloodstream. One of the most famous of these hormones is cortisol, one of several stress hormones. Amongst other functions, cortisol gives your body extra energy as you respond to the ECS, and it loops back to the brain, informing and modifying your cognitive reactions. The third stimulated system controls your skeletal muscles. This system is designed either to get you to move somewhere or cause you to suddenly stand still. Signals include fighting or fleeing or simply freezing in place. Other signals change the expression on your face. Shock or horror comes to mind. These muscular stimulations take energy, provided conveniently by the previous two systems. You use muscles to get you out of dodge, or, if all else fails, pull out your six-gun. That's one of the reasons these responses are called by their famous name, the fight or flight response. Unpleasant as these experiences may be, it's very important that your body undergoes these fight or flight responses. They provide evolutionary advantages. What happens if your body does not can be explained by answering the following trivia question. Ready? What do John F. Kennedy, pop singer Helen Reddy, and possibly the late Osama bin Laden, Jane Austen, and Charles Dickens all have in common? Give up? According to Wikipedia, the answer is they all suffered from, or probably suffered from, a condition called Addison's disease. Addison's disease is a rare condition where, in response to stressful situations, your body does, well, nothing. It's supposed to dump stress hormones into the bloodstream. In Addison's, no such response occurs. That's a big problem. If a saber-toothed cat is running after you, you need to get all upset and start running with the extra energy boost being upset gives you. No such boost occurs with Addison's. Instead, you get a drop in blood pressure, a loss of circulation. You can go into catastrophic shock, experiencing a condition termed the Addisonian crisis. This is a very serious affair and can result in death. It's so serious that people with Addison's often do not survive surgery, except if you're a future president of the United States. John F. Kennedy may be the only person to have successfully gone through a surgery and lived to see another day with Addison's. The potential lethality of Addison's disease underscores a critical point. In the face of physical challenge, your body needs you to respond with fight or flight. It needs to alert the amygdala and the hypothalamus. It needs the autonomic system stimulation, the endocrine system stimulation, the skeletal muscle stimulation. It needs you to be able to conjure up an emotional response so you can live to see another day. Emotions and their accompanying feelings thus have deep survival benefits. Indeed, you can see rudimentary aspects of emotional processing in sea slugs. There may even be universally experienced emotions in the human family, independent of cultural influences or environmental factors. I will have much more to say about the innate adaptive benefits of emotions and feelings in the next lecture. Now, to the practical. The insight that a two-way street exists between brains and bodies, appraisals, reactions, thoughts, and feelings underscores the idea that body and brain have roles to play in both the cause and effect of emotional experiences. This two-way interaction has been exploited to design a therapy we discussed way back in lecture number 4 called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. One of the foundational notions of cognitive behavioral therapy is that thoughts and emotions, feelings are connected. Put simply, your cognitions can influence your emotions and feelings just as your emotions and feelings can influence our cognitions. Your ability to think in a certain way influences how you feel. When your thinking is self-defeating, your feelings are self-defeating. This is because they're connected. Obviously, if you could learn to adjust your thoughts, you could learn to adjust your feelings. Positive things might even occur. If your thoughts become self-affirming, your feelings become self-affirming. Cognitive behavior therapy trains people to adjust their thought life so their emotional life can positively respond. It can do that because there is a link. It is one of the most successful therapies for affective disorders that exist. Put simply, CBT is a series of guided conversations between a highly trained therapist and a client. These are called talk therapies, though the correct words are psychosocial therapies. They are action-oriented, usually focusing on the present, and can be of longer or shorter duration. CBT has proven to be an effective treatment for a wide variety of mental health issues, from mood disorders like depression and anxiety to thought disorders such as schizophrenia. Cognitive behavioral therapy also recognizes the information flows in the other direction, how you're feeling can influence what you're thinking. You can easily become locked in a behavioral death spiral when emotions are negative and self-defeating. They can trigger a host of negative thoughts, some of which pop into your thinking with such frequency they seem automatic. Therapists even give these a name. They are called negative automatic thoughts, or NATs. Once again, CBT addresses these issues by providing tools to adjust our thought life in order to successfully manage our emotional and feeling life. It asks you to provide more balanced alternatives to the NATs, which are by definition negative. It is not asking you to think in a more positive fashion, just in a more balanced fashion. With proper practice, bad feelings often weaken and then they go away. In many ways, CBT is all about what you pay attention to, what you put your Post-it notes on, which is another functional characteristic of our emotions. Indeed, our emotional brains are profoundly connected to our ability to pay attention to things. They even help us make decisions. This mysterious linkage is something we will consider in our next lecture.